Hello, good people. It's Professor Wachtel. We are continuing with our exploration of Plato's theory of human nature as expressed in the Republic. The topic of this discussion segment is, can we say that what is true of the city is true of the soul? Is what is true of the city true of the soul? Socrates and his interlocutors have come to a crucial moment in the discussion with the definition of justice as the principle of specialization. That is, justice is, in their analysis, each part of the ideal state performing its proper function and not interfering with the function of the others. That is, each class performing its proper function and not being busybodies. What are busybodies? A busybody is a person who is always getting his or her fingers into other people's business. Justice in the ideal state is each class doing its own job and not getting in the way of the jobs of the others. We must remember that the discussion of justice in Plato's Republic did not begin with the discussion of justice at the level of the state. The discussion did not start out as a political discussion. The discussion started out in Book 1 with the question of what is justice at the level of the individual person. That discussion reached a dead end. At that point, Socrates introduced the idea of examining justice through the ideal state with the thought that justice will be easier to see in the ideal state than in the person because states are bigger than individuals. Through the discussion of the three-class structure of the ideal state, Socrates and his interlocutors arrived at a definition of justice. It is not immediately obvious, however, that what is true of the city is true of the soul. How can Socrates argue that what is true of the city is true of the soul? To make this argument, Socrates has to offer an analogy of the city and the soul. We have discussed earlier what an analogy is. Consider that justice in the city is known through understanding the three-part class structure. It's the three-part class structure that allows for the discovery of justice in the city. Can the same be said of the soul? Can we say that the soul, that is the person, consists of a three-part structure where each part performs similar functions to the parts of the ideal city, that is, to the three classes of the ideal city? This is not immediately obvious, because it is not obvious that the soul, that which defines the person, has parts, let alone has three parts. Socrates puts his finger on this difficulty. But the question is not so easy when we proceed to ask whether these principles are three or one, whether, that is to say, we learn with one part of our nature, are angry with another, and with a third part desire the satisfaction of our natural appetites, or whether the whole soul comes into play in each sort of action. To determine that is the difficulty. How does one know if a thing consists of parts, in this case the person? But how does one know with regard to anything whether or not it consists of parts? Socrates articulates a principle by which we can be justified in asserting that a thing consists of parts. but the language that he uses is quite difficult to understand, and many people, many readers, stumble over it. Socrates says as follows about how to distinguish whether or not a thing consists of parts. The same thing clearly cannot act or be acted upon in the same part or in relation to the same thing at the same time in contrary ways, and therefore, whenever this contradiction occurs in things apparently the same, we know that they are really not the same, but different. Now, I would certainly not blame anyone if upon reading that sentence for the first time, one scratched one's head and wondered what on earth Socrates means. Fortunately, if one is a courageous reader and reads a bit further down the dialogue, Socrates offers a useful example to help us understand this principle for when we are justified in asserting that a thing consists of parts. He asks us to imagine a person both standing still and at the same time moving his head and his hands. Imagine the case of a man who is standing and also moving his hands and his head, and suppose a person to say that one and the same person is in motion and at rest at the same moment. To such a mode of speech we should object, and should rather say that one part of him is in motion while another is at rest. To make the claim that one and the same person is both moving and standing still at the same time does not make sense if one is referring to the person as a whole. On the other hand, if one understands the person as consisting of parts, one can claim that one part of the person is moving and another part is standing still at the same time. Imagine again the person with his legs in one place. That is, imagine a person whose feet are not moving, is not taking steps forward, backwards, or sideways. At the same time, that person could be moving his head around and could be moving his hands around. Is the person in motion or is the person at rest? In one sense, the person is at rest. The person is neither moving forward, backwards, or sideways, nor is the person jumping up and down. So one might say that the person's torso or center line is at rest. At the same time, if the person's head is moving back and forth and hands are wiggling around, the person can be said to be moving. That is, moving his head and or his hands. In order for us to make sense of the claim that two contradictory properties are true of the same thing at the same time, in this case the person, we need to divide the person into parts. If it makes sense to divide the person into parts, then we can predicate these incompatible qualities, these incompatible actions of the person at the same time by qualifying our statement. Certain parts are at rest and certain parts are moving. Socrates proceeds to argue that this kind of division in parts makes perfect sense with regard to a person, not merely to a person's body, but to a person insofar as each individual consists of distinguishable powers within the individual that make every person a person. That is, these parts together are essential components of what it means to be a human being. Here is where Plato's theory of human nature emerges within the discussion of justice in the Republic. Socrates argues that the soul consists of parts. By telling stories, he tells stories in order for his listeners, Glaucon and Adimantus, and of course Plato tells stories for us, his readers, to come to easily relate to this idea that the person consists of parts. In what follows now, I will modernize one of the stories that Plato tells in the Republic. In the Republic, Plato speaks of a person who is thirsty. Imagine the following. You are a party animal. You are the kind of person that loves to go out and party. But you don't like just any parties. You like the coolest parties. You like the hippest parties. You are a party animal of the underground. Earlier in the day, someone passed you a message. It was a message containing the password for an underground rave and an address. This is a party for the hippest of the hip, the coolest of the cool. Night falls, and you head to the address that you have been given. It is an address in a warehouse neighborhood in Brooklyn. The door you approach has no name on it. You merely knock on the door, and a person cracks the door, and if you have the password, as you do, you are allowed in. When you are inside, you find a raging rave. DJs so cool, most people haven't even heard of them. A dark environment. A booming sound system. Several kegs of beer. People dancing feverishly. Since this is not a legally approved facility for gathering, there are no laws pertaining to smoking being observed. And that is, this is not a non-smoking environment. The lights, the clouds of smoke, the pounding music, the cooler than cool people. This is fun. And you dance your heart out until, say, 3:30 or so in the morning. There's a good reason, however, that use of space like this is not legal. Things can go tragically wrong if, for example, a fire starts in a space where there are inadequate fire exits, for example, as is the case in the space in which you are currently partying. It is not shocking that parties like this are frequently busted by the cops. And sure enough, that is what happens to this party. You flee. You do not want to be busted. You do not want to spend a night in jail. You do not want to have to call somebody to get you out of jail. And furthermore, you know that there is a warrant out for your arrest due to unpaid parking tickets and overdue library books. So you get out as best you can, and you are alone in the Brooklyn night, in a neighborhood that is unfamiliar to you, and worse, in the party space, you have left your wallet, your keys, and your phone. At this point, you realize that you've been dancing all night, and you were sweaty, and dehydrated, and you are now extremely thirsty. However, you are alone in the Brooklyn night with no money and no phone. You continue down the street, and there is not so much as a cab driving by. You do not want to go the other way because you do not want to spend the night in jail. Your thirst grows. You turn a corner, and to your surprise you see water ahead. The Gowanus Canal. The Gowanus Canal. Easy peasy. No problem. Just take one hand and sweep away from the water you want to drink. Sweep the dead rat out of the water. Sweep the garbage away. Dip the other hand. Drink. Problem solved. But wait, something in you says. Polluted water is likely to make me sick. Polluted water is likely to send me to the hospital with a more deadly disease than mere dehydration. So you decide not to drink from the Gowanus Canal. What is happening here? Consider your condition. Two contradictory things are true of you at the same time. You are thirsty, and thirst is a deep bodily feeling. It is a desire. It is a desire for satisfaction through hydration. At the same time, you do not drink. You fight your desire to drink. You know that this water is deadly. So what would Socrates say about your condition? You both desire to drink and refuse to drink. How can this be? Socrates' explanation is that this condition is possible because one part of you desires and another part of you reasons that the water before you will hurt more than help. You can be in this condition, Socrates proposes, because you consist of two parts, one which has the job of reasoning and the other has the job of desiring. They both exist at the same time in the person. These parts each represent a power of soul, a desiring power of soul, and a reasoning power of soul. The desiring power of soul, of course, performs the same function in the person as the producer class does in the ideal state. It is oriented toward the satisfaction of bodily desires. The reasoning part performs the same type of function in the person as the ruling class of the ideal state. Its function is knowing and the making of rules based on what is known. Plato turns to a different story to complete the analogy. The two parts identified in the story surrounding thirst are not sufficient for the full analogy of the city and the soul. We have a desiring part analogous to the producer class, and we have a reasoning part analogous to the ruling class. What we do not yet have is reason to believe that the person includes a part analogous to the auxiliaries. That is, we do not yet have reason to believe that the person includes a part that has the job of enforcing the rule of reason over desire. To show us that we do in fact include such a part, Socrates tells a story. What I'll do now is talk specifically about the story that Socrates tells. I will then point out why I don't think it's the best example, and then I will turn to a more contemporary example that if Plato had known about it, quite likely he would have preferred it to the story that he included in the Republic. There is a story, Socrates says, which I remember to have heard, and in which I put faith. The story is that Leontius, the son of Aglaion, coming up one day from the Piraeus, under the north wall on the outside, observed some dead bodies lying on the ground at the place of execution. He felt a desire to see them, and also a dread and abhorrence of them. For a time, he struggled and covered his eyes, but at length the desire got the better of him, and forcing them open, he ran up to the dead bodies, saying, "Look, ye wretches, take your fill of the fair sight. Look, ye wretches, take your fill of the fair sight." What is happening with Leontius? Leontius has a desire, the desire to see the dead bodies. At the same time, he knows that this sight is likely to be disturbing. If one wants to relate to Leontius, perhaps one can consider the phenomenon of people rubbernecking on the highway. People, that is, slowing down to see an accident on the highway. Everyone knows that if one looks at the aftermath of an accident, one is likely to see something that one would rather not see. Such was the case with Leontius. He knew that the dead bodies at the site of execution were a sight that was likely to be disturbing, something he would rather not see, and yet he was also curious. So consider his condition. He desires to see. He has the knowledge that what he's likely to see is the kind of thing that's going to give him nightmares, and he tries very hard to look away. But as hard as Leontius tries to look away, his curiosity continues. His desire continues in spite of his knowledge that the grisly sight is likely to give him nightmares. He wonders, does he know any of the people who might have been executed? And then he thinks, nope, I'd rather not find out. I am going to continue on my way. I am not going to look. I know that the sight will give me nightmares. But what, he wonders, was the method of execution? Nope. I'm not going to find out, I imagine him saying to himself. I'd rather not see. I will read about it in the newspaper maybe, but I would rather not see it. If there's blood. But is there blood? He wonders. His curiosity continues. Try as he might, Leontius fails to restrain his curiosity, his desire to see, even though he knows that what he is going to see will give him nightmares. Eventually he can't resist, and he runs up to the bodies, and he looks, and according to Plato's story, he yells, "Take your fill of the fair sight, ye wretches." Who are ye wretches? Leontius is yelling at his own eyes. This story, Socrates suggests, only makes sense if among Leontius's faculty of desire and among his faculty of reason, there's also a faculty that has the job of getting desire to follow reason. That is, a faculty that has the same function as the auxiliaries have in the ideal state. In this case, Leontius expresses anger at himself because his spirited faculty, that which has the job of getting desire to follow reason, fails. He is essentially kicking himself. The popular phrase that people use, "I've kicked myself," means I have essentially punished myself for some dumb thing that I did. When you hear a person say, "Oh, I'm an idiot, I shouldn't have done that," they are expressing something much like what Plato has Leontius expressing toward his eyes. "Take your fill of the fair sight, ye wretches. Oh, I'm such an idiot for looking. Now I'm going to have a nightmare." So in this instance, the story that Plato's character Socrates uses to demonstrate the existence of the faculty in the person, the spirited part, that is analogous to the function of the auxiliaries, is a negative example. It is an example of a failure of the spirited part to enforce reason over desire. A story that makes this point more effectively is available in our times. Several years ago, there was a movie by the title of 127 Hours. The movie tells the story of a hiker who goes off by himself and has an accident while hiking. He falls into a ravine. His arm is trapped. There is no one around to help him. The possibilities for him are not good. He reasons that the only way he can save his life, that is the only way he can fulfill the desire of seeing another day, is to sever his own arm in order to free himself. He has with him a pocket knife, and he succeeds in doing this. Now, this is not an easy thing, I think, for anyone to imagine, but consider the stakes. If he does nothing, death one way or the other is inevitable. But what he has to do, what he knows is his best option to save himself, is a terribly difficult thing to do, and success is not guaranteed. The hiker succeeds in severing his own arm. See, I have trouble even saying it. It is a difficult thing to imagine. And he also succeeds in stopping the bleeding in such a way that he can use his other arm to crawl out of the ravine, and he has saved his own life. Consider the following, please. The hiker wants to live, and the hiker figures out that the only way that he can save himself is to sever his arm. He knows that. But just by knowing that this drastic action is required to save his life, does that automatically give him the power to do it? Could someone have the desire to live and know what it takes to bring that desire about, yet not be able to enforce the rule of reason? If it is the case that a person can know the right thing to do, yet still not do it, if it is the case that there are competing desires, such as, on the one hand, the desire to live, and on the other hand, the desire not to damage one's body, and or not to experience the pain of damaging one's body, it seems clear that the power to enforce the rule of reason in a situation like this is different from reason itself and different from desire itself. So if Plato had access to this story, I think he would take it to illustrate that there is, in fact, a part of the soul, a power of soul, that has the job of enforcing the rule of reason. So we now have three parts of the soul, each of which performs a closely analogous function to the three parts of the ideal state. If this is the case, then it makes sense to say that what is true of the city is true of the soul. We can test this in the same way we tested the definition of justice at the level of the city. We tested the definition of justice at the level of the city by imagining what would go wrong if each part started trying to do the job of another part. Consider what may happen for a person if the faculty of desire starts to do the job, or attempts to do the job, of the faculty of reason. Will the person's life get better or worse? Clearly it will get worse. Consider the possibility of a person's spirited faculty trying to do the job of the rational faculty. Will the person's life get better or worse? If this were the case, it seems like the person would get quite reckless. Finally, consider the possibility of a person's rational faculty trying to do the job of a person's desiring faculty. If it is the case that the failure of faculties to do their own function and not get in the way of other faculties makes a person's life worse, then it follows that the goodness or well-being of the individual person is a result of the specialization of each faculty. And thus Plato concludes that justice at the level of the individual person is the same as justice in the larger picture of the city. Plato concludes the analogy of the city and the soul with the following statement about justice at the level of the person. I alter the language slightly as I read. But in reality, justice was such as we were describing, being concerned, however, not with the outward person, but with the inward, which is the true self and concernment. For the just person does not permit the several elements within to interfere with one another, or any of them to do the work of others. The just person sets in order one's own inner life and is one's own master and one's own law, and at peace with oneself. And when the just person has bound together the three principles within, when the just person has bound all these together and is no longer many, but has become one entirely temperate and perfectly adjusted nature, then the just person proceeds to act, if necessary, whether in a matter of property, or in the treatment of the body, or in some affair of politics or private business, always thinking and calling that which preserves and cooperates with this harmonious condition just and good action, and the knowledge which presides over it, wisdom, and that which at any time impairs this condition, the person will call unjust action, and the opinion which presides over it, ignorance. This idea that a just person consists of three parts, each doing their own function and not interfering with one another, is called by some Plato's doctrine of psychic harmony. Psychic, in this case, does not refer to fortune tellers or card readers or any such questionable people. Psychic, in this context, means having to do with the soul, or in Greek, psyche. Justice, in Plato's understanding, is psychic harmony. There would have been no way to come to this understanding had Plato not done a little anatomy of the soul via the analogy of the city and the soul. Plato discusses matters of human nature in other dialogues, most notably the Phaedo, in which Plato argues for the immortality of the soul. In that dialogue, it is not evident to me that the soul, considered to be a non-material substance like the forms, has much to do with the person as an individual. Thus, this extended discussion of Plato's analogy of the city and the soul is the best way to gain understanding of Plato's theory of human nature, where human nature is understood to refer to embodied persons during their natural lives.